Imagine you're a Qing dynasty palace maid, the lowest of the low. Your father was a bondservant in the imperial household department. You're 16 years old, and your whole life revolves around scrubbing floors, cleaning clothes, and serving tea to the women of the imperial harem. Now, fast forward 30 years, and you're buried at the right hand side of one of the most powerful rulers in the ancient world, the Qianlong Emperor. Your son sits on the throne, ruling all of China, and your once humble beginnings turn into one of the most bizarre palace stories in modern times. Your name is Wei Jia, also known as Consort Ling, the future Empress of China. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I cover deep dives into history and the lives of the past. And if you've been following my series on Qianlong's court, you'll know that I've previously touched on Empress Nara, the woman history tried to erase. And today, we're flipping the script a little bit and talking about her opposite and her eventual replacement, Ling Fei, or Consort Ling. Lots of you had comments about her on the last episode, and by the end of this episode, I promise you'll see how the woman who started with nothing ended up with everything. So hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into the life of the woman who carried Empress Fuca's spirit through Qianlong's reign, one step at a time. Let's start with who Lady Wei was, because understanding her background makes her rise even more incredible. We know that she was born on October 23rd, 1727, to a Han Chinese family. Not Manchu, Han Chinese. And that's already strike one in the Qing dynasty imperial system, which heavily favored Manchu nobility. Her father, Wei Qingtai, was a bondservant manager in the imperial household department, which meant that he managed other bondservants. The Wei family were Baoyi status, and they were essentially owned by the imperial household. They were part of the lowest social class allowed anywhere near the Forbidden City. Her family would later be incorporated into the bordered yellow banner, and their surname was Manchurified from Wei to Weijia to make them sound more respectable. But here's the important part. Because her family were Baoyi, Lady Wei couldn't enter the imperial harem the normal way through the imperial draft, where noble families would present their daughters to become consorts. That was completely closed off to her. And this brings us to our first question. How exactly did she get into the inner palace of the Forbidden City? The most agreed upon theory is that she entered as a gongnu, a palace maid, a servant selected through a bond-servant household process designed to provide staff, not wives. She would have been doing menial work like cleaning, serving, and attending to higher-ranking women. She was sent to work in Changchunggong, the residence of the current Empress Fuca, Qianlong's greatest love. And she was noticed almost immediately by Fuca, who took the young Wei under her care and taught her not only reading and writing, but also how to act and think in the Forbidden City. And most importantly, she learned the character of the woman Qianlong loved the most. She observed Fuca's famous frugality, like how she would wear artificial flowers in her hair instead of jewels to save the state's money. She learned focus, gentleness, and emotional steadiness, and a relationship that should have been master and servant instead had something more profound growing, a relationship built on friendship and admiration. And for 2 years, her life was stable and steady. But something would happen in Changchunggong that would change her life forever. She caught the eye of the Qianlong Emperor, and in 1745, when she was just 18 years old, she was granted the rank of Guiren, or noble lady. She was no longer a maid, she was the newest member of the harem. And that was just the beginning for her. What happened next was unprecedented. She climbed the ranks faster than any other woman in the imperial harem's history. In December of 1745, Just a few months later, she was promoted to Lingpin, concubine Ling, the fifth rank, her honorific Ling meaning excellent or virtuous. Shockingly, in 1748, tragedy would strike the empire, and during a southern tour with the emperor, Empress Fuca fell ill and died at the age of 36, and Qianlong was inconsolable. As discussed in my previous video on Empress Fuca linked above, Qianlong kept Empress Fuca's living quarters completely untouched for decades, and ordered that Fuca's portraits be hung in the main hall of Changchunggong for all future celebrations for the rest of time. And in that vacuum of this heavy grief, Lingpin's status starts to skyrocket. In May 1749, she becomes Lingfei, Consort Ling, fourth ranking. And here's the crazy thing, at this point she still hadn't given the emperor any children, but he was besotted, and historical records describe her as gentle and beautiful and note that the emperor doted on her. Now let's talk about what really secured her position. Children, and lots of them, one after the other. By the late 1750s, Ling's position in the Qing court was no longer speculative. It was being cemented through childbirth. In August 1756, she gave birth to Princess Hejing, the emperor's seventh daughter. Ling was nearly 29 years old, which is unusually late for a first pregnancy by Qing standards. Yet this birth marked the beginning of an intense and almost uninterrupted reproductive period for her. Just 1 year later, in August 1757, she bore Prince Yingluo, the emperor's 14th son. Though this birth was celebrated, tragedy followed rather quickly, and he would die at just 3 years old. In August 1758, Ling gave birth again, this time to Princess Ruyi, the emperor's ninth daughter. Then in November 1759, she endured a devastating loss, a stillbirth at 8 months. Despite, or perhaps because of this relentless sequence of pregnancies and losses, Ling was formally elevated in February 1760, and she was promoted from Lingfei to Lingguifei, noble consort Ling, the third rank in the harem. This promotion came while Empress Nara was still officially secure in her position and outwardly intact, even as her relationship with the Qianlong Emperor was quietly deteriorating. Then came the turning point. In November 1760, Ling gave birth to Prince Yongyan, the emperor's 15th son, a child who would later ascend the throne as the Jiaqing Emperor. At the time, no one could have predicted his future, but retrospectively, this birth would become the single most consequential event in Ling's life. She continued to bear children. In January 1763, she gave birth to another son, the 16th prince, who tragically died at 2 years old. Meanwhile, the broader political landscape of the inner court was about to fracture. In 1765, Emperor Qianlong embarked on another southern tour accompanied by Empress Nara. During this journey, the infamous incident occurred. The empress cut her hair, a shocking act with deep cultural and ritual implications, and the fallout was almost immediate and catastrophic. Nara was sent back to Beijing in disgrace, effectively erased while still alive, confined, silenced, and stripped of all real authority. 6 months after Qianlong returned to the Forbidden City, the power shift became unmistakable. He promoted Ling Guifei to Ling Huangguifei, imperial noble consort, the second rank and highest position beneath the empress herself. In practical terms, Ling became the de facto first woman of the harem, while Empress Nara remained empress in name only, unraveling behind closed palace doors. And Ling didn't slow down. In June 1766, she gave birth once more to Prince Yonglian, the emperor's 17th son. a final, almost symbolic confirmation that while one empress was being erased, another woman's lineage and influence were still very much alive. So let's pause and count. By this point, Lady Wei has given the emperor 7 children, 4 sons and 3 daughters. That's more than almost any other consort in the entire Qing dynasty. Only 2 other consorts in nearly 300 years of Qing rule matched that record. For context, the famous Empress Xiaoyichun, Qianlong's greatest love, had 4 children, 2 of whom would die young. Empress Nara had 3 children, 2 of whom would also die in infancy. And Consort Ling? She had 7 pregnancies and 4 children surviving into adulthood. She was the undisputed childbearing champion of Qianlong's reign. And to deepen matters further, when Empress Nara died in August 1766, Qianlong made a decision that would define the rest of his reign. He never appointed another empress. The position stayed empty for the remaining 33 years of his life, despite there being an abundance of women to choose from. Why do you think that was? Was it because Nara's betrayal, or was it because he couldn't bear to appoint yet another empress on top of Empress Fuca? Whatever his reasoning, someone had to run the harem. Someone had to manage the ceremonies, the budgets, the education of princes, and the marriages of the princesses. Someone had to be the empress in all but name. And that someone was Ling Huangguifei. As imperial noble consort, the highest ranking woman in the Forbidden City, she took on every single duty an empress would have handled. She would even travel with the emperor on his excursions to Mount Tai and regions south of the Yangtze River. For 10 years, this was her life, and she was Qianlong's closest confidant. But here's what's truly fascinating. Despite her power, despite her favor, and despite giving birth to the future emperor, Qianlong never gave her the empress title. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, why? Well, we have 3 theories. Some historians think that he never got over Empress Fuca. Others suggest that what Nara did to him was so unforgivable that he gave up on having an empress. And others believe that he simply didn't want to deal with the politics of choosing a third empress when his obvious choice was a woman of Han descent. Whatever the reason, Consort Ling would have to wait until after her death to receive the title she'd effectively held for a decade. Fast forward to 1773, and something monumentally important is happening behind the closed palace doors. Emperor Qianlong, now in his 60s, decided it was time to secretly appoint his heir. 7 of his sons were still alive. Some were more talented, more charismatic, more obviously qualified, but he chose Yongyan, Consort Ling's son. But why? Historical records tell us that Yongyan was hardworking but not outstanding and displayed humility. He wasn't the most brilliant prince, but he was steady, diligent, and respectful, something we know Qianlong valued in those closest to him. I like to imagine that she knew that her son would one day be the emperor. She came from serving in the inner palace to being the head of the inner palace. But despite all of her success, all of her children, and all of her power, Consort Ling's later years were marked by tragedy. She'd been healthy for most of her life, but as the years ticked by, she grew increasingly ill. Maybe that was a result of her early years as a gongyu, or it could have been the trauma that 7 pregnancies had on her body, or something else entirely. Sadly, we'll never know. Ling Huangguifei's final blow came on February 9, 1775, in the form of news that her eldest daughter, Princess Hejing, had died suddenly at only 18 years old. That news devastated Consort Ling, and her health, that was already fragile, completely collapsed. Less than 3 weeks later, on February 28, 1775, Ling Huangguifei died at the age of 47. She died without ever holding the title of empress. She died before her son took the throne. She died not knowing if history would remember her as anything more than a favored consort. But the emperor? The man who had refused to name another empress for nearly 10 years? He had other plans. On March 12th, just 2 weeks after her death, Qianlong granted her the posthumous title Imperial Noble Consort Lingyi. And then, the funeral, as with Empress Nara, is what told the real story. Her funeral was far more elaborate than any Huangguifei had ever received. It almost surpassed that of an empress. The coffin, the ceremonies, the mourning period, all far beyond what her rank technically entitled her to. And on November 19th, 1775, she was buried in the Yu Mausoleum in the Eastern Qing tombs, the same place where Qianlong would eventually be entombed. But her story doesn't end there. On February 9th, 1796, Emperor Qianlong, now 85 years old and one of the longest reigning emperors in Chinese history, made 2 announcements that would shock the court. First, he was abdicating. After 60 years on the throne, he was stepping down out of respect for his grandfather, Emperor Kangxi. And secondly, he posthumously elevated Lady Wei to Empress Xiaoyi. And then he announced that Yongyan, her son, the boy she had raised, the prince secretly chosen 23 years earlier, would ascend the throne as the Jiaqing Emperor. When Qianlong himself died on February 7th, 1799, the now Emperor Jiaqing honored his mother with her final, full posthumous title, Empress Xiaoyichun. The woman who had entered the Forbidden City as a maid left it as an empress, not in title during her lifetime, but in honor, in legacy, and in the annals of history. But here's what strikes me the most. Records show that Consort Ling didn't scheme or plot, or try to destroy others to get to where she was. By all accounts, she was gentle, competent, and devoted. She gave the emperor 7 children. She served the harem well, and she raised a good son. She didn't win by being ruthless. She won by being exactly what the emperor needed: someone stable, reliable, and present. Someone like Fuca. So, what do you think of Consort Ling's story? Do you think she was genuinely favored? Or did Qianlong's love for Empress Fuca have something to do with it? And why do you think that Qianlong waited until after she had died to name her empress? As always, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button. It really does help the algorithm show this video to more history nerds like us. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss the future episodes. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the more you know.